The cry that ripped across the desert that evening has never left me. Yet what I discovered lashed to those iron rails was worse than any terror my mind had ever cooked up. I was heading back toward town after checking the herd on the north pasture when the sunset smeared the sky with a deep orange glow. My horse, Thunder, had been on edge all day, and I figured a storm was building somewhere out past the mesas. The railroad cut across the flats like a long metal scar. That's when I heard it again, not a scream this time, but a desperate sob that turned my blood to ice. She was there, a young woman, about 25, tied hard to the railroad ties with thick rope. Sweat and dust clung to her dark hair, and the sleeves of her blue dress were torn. She pulled so hard at the bindings that her wrists bled, but whoever tied her knew their business. The knots were neat and exact, no drifter's quick job, but the work of someone practiced. I slid off Thunder and ran to her, boots crunching the gravel between the rails. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she tried to speak around the gag. Fear owned her face, but there was something else there, too, a look that said she knew exactly who had done this. The rope was as thick as my thumb, wrapped around her so many times I couldn't tell where it started or ended. I yanked out my knife and started sawing at the top strand, but the blade was dull from skinning rabbits that morning. Every cut felt like it took a year, and the seconds slipped by like dry sand through open fingers. That's when the sound hit me, the far-off whistle of the evening freight. It always rolled through at sundown, hauling goods north to the mining camps. I knew that whistle the way I knew my own heartbeat, which meant I also knew how little time we had. 10 minutes, if luck was kind. Maybe less. I worked faster, sweat stinging my eyes, while I carved through rope after rope. The woman tried again to speak under the gag, her eyes flicking toward the horizon again and again. When I got the cloth out of her mouth, her first words were not the plea I expected. She gulped air and rasped, "They're coming back. You have to leave me. Run." But I couldn't run. Not with that whistle growing louder. Not with the terror in her eyes telling me this mess was only the surface of something darker. I ignored her warning and pushed on, but the bindings felt endless. For each loop I cut, 3 more waited underneath. Whoever tied her wanted her stuck here, and they'd done the job too well. My hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from the cold thought that this wasn't random. Her name, between sharp breaths, was Sarah. She said she worked at the general store and had been walking home after visiting her sick mother when they grabbed her. But when I asked who they were, her face went as white as new snow. She cast a look toward the hills and whispered, "The Garrett brothers." They said they were going to send a message loud enough to reach the capital. I knew that name. 3 brothers who'd been stirring up trouble for months, robbing stages, stealing cattle, and leaving at least 2 lawmen dead that I knew of. But tying a woman to the tracks? That was lower than I thought they'd crawl. Another whistle, closer now. I could feel the rails hum under my knees. That thin vibration that means death is rushing on 2 steel lines. My knife finally bit through another wrap and freed her right arm, but her legs were still cinched to the rails. Then I saw them, 3 riders on the ridge, a quarter-mile out, horses standing easy like they had all the time in the world. Even from that distance, I felt their eyes on us. They wanted to be seen. They wanted me to know this was a show, planned and staged, and I was the fool walking into the trap. Sarah saw them too. Panic lit her face, and she fought the ropes with new fury. "They said someone would come," she choked out. "They want to see what kind of man tries to be a hero." The rails buzzed harder. I heard the engine's heavy chug and the thin screech of wheels on metal. 5 minutes, maybe. I was starting to see the game the Garretts were playing, piece by careful piece. But they didn't know that I'd spent years chasing bad men before I ever ran cattle. I wasn't about to let cowards on a ridge decide who lived or died in my county. The real question was whether I could cut Sarah loose and survive 3 armed riders before the train turned us into a story folks would whisper about. My knife gave up as I freed Sarah's left leg. The blades snapped clean, the rope claiming the win. I flung the handle away and dug at the remaining knots with my bare hands, nails splitting, skin tearing. The whistle wailed again, and this time I heard the engine echo off the canyon walls. The rails shook steadily now, sending tremors through my knees. 3 minutes, if luck held. Sarah's right leg was still lashed to iron. I glanced up. The riders were coming down the slope, slow and sure. No rush. They knew they had us. Sarah saw them and let out a sob that cut like a blade. She grabbed my arm with her free hand. "I have to tell you something," she said, voice shaking. "It isn't just me. They said they'd kill anyone who tried to help, and then burn the church where my father preaches. They want everyone to learn what happens when folks stand up to them." Cold spread through me. Reverend Marcus, Sarah's father, had been leading the push for law in our territory. He'd written to the governor, called town meetings, even testified when the Garretts were caught last spring. They'd walked on a technicality, but Marcus had shamed them in front of everyone. This wasn't about robbery. It was about terror. Break one person, and the rest start to bend. They'd chosen the preacher's daughter to make the lesson stick. I wrapped both hands around the rope, binding her right leg, and hauled with everything I had. The hemp chewed my palms raw, and warm wetness slid down my wrists. Blood, but I didn't care. The train roared closer. A dull light showed around the bend. We were almost out of time. Tears ran down Sarah's face now, not from pain, but from the awful picture forming in her mind. "Leave me," she whispered. "Save yourself. Warn my father. Don't let them win." I couldn't do it. Not when her eyes begged me. Not when I knew walking away would follow me for the rest of my days. The rope started to loosen, but not fast enough. The headlight cleared the curve, a single harsh eye cutting through the dusk. Hoofbeats thumped behind us, and a voice crawled across my skin. "Well now, looks like we found us a hero." I turned slow, hands where they could see. The Garrett brothers sat their horses 30 yards out, spread in a line like they were posing for a daguerreotype. Marcus, the oldest, was a big man with a black beard and dead, cold eyes. Tom and Billy flanked him, hands easy near their guns. "You boys picked the wrong woman," I said, standing. The ground shivered under my boots. 2 minutes, maybe less. Marcus laughed, stone grinding stone. "Did we? And who are you to tell us so?" "Name's Jake Thompson. I run cattle on the North Range. I don't take kindly to men who tie women to tracks." "Jake Thompson," he repeated, rolling it slow. "I heard of you. Bounty man once, they say. Killed 8 down in Arizona." 7, I thought, but I let it lie. That life was gone, or so I told myself. "Not so long you forgot how to die," Marcus said, spitting dust. "Here's how this goes. You turn around and walk away. Ride back to town. Forget you saw us. If you're smart, you'll drive your herd someplace else and never come back." The whistle screamed, so loud it stabbed my ears. Sarah fought the last rope, fingers cut and slick with blood. The headlight threw hard shadows around us. "And if I don't?" I asked. Billy grinned and drew. "Then you die with the preacher's girl. We'll tell the town you tried to play hero and wound up buzzard meat." I saw the math in Marcus's eyes. They hadn't planned on someone like me showing up. They wanted fear, not witnesses. One way or another, they meant to kill us. The train's light blazed white now. I heard the brakes squeal, an engineer who knew something was wrong. But heavy freight doesn't stop for hope. 30 seconds, if that. I drew and fired twice at Billy. He jerked back off his horse, pistol clanging on stone. Tom moved faster than I expected. His shot punched my left shoulder and spun me to a knee. The ground shook like a quake. 20 seconds. Sarah cried my name as hot blood soaked my shirt. I forced my legs to stand. Marcus took slow, careful aim at my head when another sound cut in. More hooves, hard and fast from the east. Sheriff Wade crested the ridge with 3 deputies, horses lathered and blowing. Marcus cursed and swung his rifle toward them. Tom fumbled for rounds, but Deputy Morrison's shot took him through the chest before he could chamber one. "Thompson," the sheriff shouted over the engine's roar. "Get her off the tracks." I stumbled back to Sarah, left arm useless, right hand slick with blood. The rope was loose, but not gone. The headlight burned my eyes. I could see the engineer leaning out, hauling the brake will like his life depended on it. But physics doesn't bargain. A freight train needs half a mile to stop, and we didn't have it. Sarah looked at me, panic gone flat into shock. I can't feel my leg. I think it's stuck under the rail. I glanced down and saw it. In tying her in a rush, the Garretts had wedged her foot beneath the iron. Rope or no rope, she wasn't going anywhere. My gut turned to stone. We needed tools, maybe a crowbar, to pry her loose. 10 seconds. Wade traded shots with Marcus, who ducked behind a boulder. The man was trapped but wild-eyed. He'd fight to the last rather than face a rope. "Jake," Sarah said, gripping my hand. "Listen. My father hid a lockbox under the church. It's proof of a land grab that reaches the territorial governor. The Garretts are hired muscle. If I die, you must get that evidence to someone who can use it." The whistle let out a long, steady scream. The engineer wasn't stopping now, just warning the living to clear out. But I wasn't moving, and neither was Sarah. "You're not dying today," I told her, not sure I could make it true. Marcus made his last move, and everything went sideways. He stepped from behind the rock with his hands up like surrender. Wade held fire for a beat, too long. I'd seen that look in a cornered man's eyes. Marcus wasn't giving up. He was buying seconds. "Deal, Sheriff," he shouted over the machine thunder. "Let me ride, and I'll tell you how to free the girl." 7 seconds. Wade hesitated, which was what Marcus needed. The outlaw reached not for a gun, but for a small leather pouch. He pulled out a little metal piece and lifted it high so we all could see. "This key opens the special lock in that rope," he yelled. "Garrett family trick. You won't cut it without this." I looked at Sarah's leg and finally saw it, the small mechanism built into the wraps, hidden by dirt and panic. It was a puzzle lock meant to make cutting useless. But I knew that even if the key worked, Marcus wouldn't help us. His eyes were empty, the kind of man who wants others to hurt before he goes. 5 seconds. The train bore down, iron filling my vision. I could see the bolts on the cowcatcher, smell hot metal and coal smoke. The engineer leaned out, mouth open in a shout I couldn't hear. Marcus tossed the key high. It flashed once in the headlight and vanished into the dark behind us. Then he yanked a lit stick of dynamite from his belt, fuse hissing fast. "If I'm going to hell," he screamed, "I'm taking you all with me." 3 seconds. Wade's shot hit Marcus square in the heart. But dying men can still throw. The dynamite arced toward the track. Even if the engine missed us, the blast would finish what it started. 2 seconds. I hooked an arm around Sarah and hurled us away from the rails, every muscle screaming. The world blew into noise and white heat, the whistle, the steam, the grinding thunder of wheel on steel. 1 second. The dynamite hit dirt beside the tracks, just as the locomotive thundered past where Sarah had been tied. It didn't explode. The fuse sputtered out in the dust. A dud. Marcus's last trick died useless, like the rest of his life. We lay in the dirt, shaking with shock and relief. But I knew this wasn't over. Sarah's warning, corruption all the way to the governor, meant the Garretts were only the front line of something much bigger and uglier. The train finally shrieked to a stop 200 yards down, steam hissing as men climbed down to see what they'd almost hit. Wade and the deputies moved among the fallen, making sure the brothers would never ride again. My eyes were on Sarah. She tried to sit up, face pale, wrists burned deep from rope. Her leg throbbed where it had been trapped, but she was alive. That was the only thing that mattered in that minute. "The key," she whispered, scanning the brush. "We have to find the key," he threw. It felt hopeless. In that chaos, he'd flung it into darkness. We could search a week and still miss it. Deputy Morrison crouched by the rope device and surprised us all. "Don't need a key," he said. "My daddy was a locksmith before ranching. This is a dressed-up puzzle lock." He pulled a small tool from his vest and got to work. "Give me 5 minutes." While Morrison picked at the mechanism, Wade pressed a bandana to my wound. The bullet had gone through clean and missed bone, but my shirt was wet with blood. "You need a doctor," he said, steady hands holding the cloth. "But first, this evidence Sarah mentioned." land scheme. Sarah's eyes widened, not from pain, but fear of what she'd just confessed. I shouldn't have said anything. They already tried to kill you, I said. Silence won't save you now. Over the next hour, while the crew helped clear the tracks and the town doctor bound our wounds, Sarah told a story that made my skin crawl. Her father, Reverend Marcus, had been tracking a plot that reached into the highest levels of the territory. Officials took bribes to approve fake land claims, letting rich investors steal homesteads from settlers who couldn't afford a lawyer. The Garretts were hired to scare anyone who stood up. They'd burned out 3 families, killed a surveyor who refused to forge papers, and now they'd tried to murder the preacher's daughter. The proof is buried under the church altar, Sarah said. Names, dates, bank records, everything. Nothing will happen to your father, Wade told her. But we'll need that evidence to clean house. Morrison clicked something in the lock, and the last coil fell away. Sarah's leg was free at last. She cried, part pain, part relief, and leaned against me while the doctor wrapped her raw wrists. Thunder stood nearby, finally calm, while the desert went strangely quiet, like it, too, was catching its breath. Part 2. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom in the territorial capital with my left arm still weaker than it used to be. It worked well enough. 12 men were convicted of conspiracy and fraud, among them a territorial judge and 2 officials who once walked the halls like they owned them. The Garrett brothers lay in their graves, and the rich man who paid them faced 20 years behind bars. Sarah sat beside me, her hand on mine. The rope scars on her wrists had faded to thin, pale lines, but memories are slower to heal. We had crossed fire together, and the heat had forged something neither of us had expected. But the cost had weight. Her father, Reverend Marcus, suffered a heart attack from the strain of the fight and the long months of testimony. He recovered, but the struggle etched years onto his face. 3 families lost their homes before the scheme was stopped, and I learned there are kinds of evil deeper than any I'd known hunting bounties. When we stepped out into the bright sun after the verdicts, Sarah squeezed my hand. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked. I thought of the whistle carving through the evening air, of the desert shaking under iron, of the look in her eyes when I found her bound to those rails, of the choice to stand and fight instead of turn away. "Ask me in 50 years, I said, and we started for home, ready to build something honest on ground that good people had bled to protect. But getting there took more than a verdict. After that night by the tracks, the work began in earnest. Wade sent 2 deputies to guard the church while we dug up the lockbox from beneath the altar stones. The box was old, edges worn smooth, and heavy enough to make me grunt when I set it on the table in the parsonage. Inside were ledgers, letters, and receipts that told the same story in different fonts. Money changing hands, false surveys, deeds filed under invented names, and orders sent in neat handwriting from men who thought themselves untouchable. Dates ran back farther than anyone guessed. Names we all knew appeared on the page like stains that wouldn't wash out. Wade read each line with a face like a carved post. "This will bring a hard wind," he said softly. He wasn't wrong. Within a week, strangers started showing up in town, some clean and smooth from the capital, some rough around the edges, all with questions. A few tried to smile their way into the parsonage. Others tried to scare us with whispers. Sarah never flinched. She stood behind her father in every meeting, calm and steady, her voice clear when the men tried to twist facts. The general store hired a new clerk so Sarah could spend her days sorting papers with Wade and the railroad agent, whose records proved when the freight cars came and went. That timeline sealed parts of the case no one could argue away. Travel to the capital for hearings wore us down. The road was long and the hotel beds too soft, and every day under oath felt like walking a thin ledge with loose gravel. But truth piled up, piece by piece. The surveyor's widow recognized a signature. A banker admitted under pressure that his ledger had errors, right where the bribes ran thickest. One of the hired writers, scared enough to talk, swore that he'd been told to make examples of any family who fought back. He named the men who gave the orders and pointed to the ledgers to match dates. When the clerk from the land office finally broke and said he'd been paid to lose certain applications, the room went so quiet I could hear the judge set his pen down. Through it all, I kept remembering the moment the dynamite hit dirt and didn't blow. Luck had brushed us with her sleeve that night, but it wasn't luck that carried us through the months after. It was Wade's steady push, Sarah's resolve, her father's stubborn faith, and the way our neighbors stood up when standing up had a cost. Folks who had been scared to speak found their voices. The blacksmith fixed tools for free. The schoolteacher copied affidavits late into the night. The railroad men swore out statements about train logs and freight weights no one else could read. It turned out there were more honest people than crooks, and that made the difference. Not every day came clean. A friend of Wade's got jumped in an alley. He lived, but the message was plain. We found a charred circle in the churchyard one morning. Someone had tried to burn a warning in the grass. It only made the congregation pack the pews tighter. Reverend Marcus preached quieter after his heart trouble, but the words landed heavier, like he'd hammered them on an anvil and brought them to the pulpit still warm. He didn't talk of revenge. He talked of courage, of telling the truth when it shakes your knees, of looking a bully in the eye and not giving ground. People left those sermons different than they came. When the trial opened, the courtroom filled with faces from every corner of the territory. Some came to see justice done. Others came to see if it could be done at all. The lawyers from the Capitol wore sharp suits and smoother smiles. They tried to say the papers were forged, the witnesses confused, the money unrelated. But the dates lined up, the testimonies matched, and numbers have a way of telling the same tale no matter who's reading. One by one, the men on the wrong side realized the ground under them was sinking. The judge's stare lost patience. The jury's faces set like stone. I took the stand for a few hours. They asked about the night at the tracks. I answered straight. I did not paint myself as a hero. I told them what Sarah said, what I saw where the brothers sat their horses, how the whistle sounded when there was almost no time left. I told them about the key glinting and vanishing and the confession wrapped in that ugly bargain Marcus tried to make. The courtroom didn't breathe for a moment when I finished. Then someone coughed and the world started again. On the day the verdicts came, the air felt different in the streets, like the town was holding one long breath. 12 men guilty. A judge who once had people's trust stood pale and small at the defense table. The two officials who sneered at us 6 months earlier stared at the floor. The rich man who paid for fear received 20 years and looked older by 20 more. Wade did not smile. He just nodded once and let out a breath I think he'd been holding since the day he saw 3 riders on a ridge. Afterward, Sarah and I walked out into the bright afternoon. The courthouse steps were warm from the sun. People shook Wade's hand, then my hand, then Sarah's, like we'd done something more than what needed to be done. The truth is, we were just stubborn enough to keep moving when the path got steep. Sarah asked if it was worth it. I pictured the desert sky bleeding orange, the rails humming under my knees, the choice that split my life into a before and an after. Ask me in 50 years, I said, and she smiled a little, the kind of smile that says a person is tired but standing. We went home and set about the slow work people forget to talk about, the rebuilding. The 3 families who'd lost their homes moved into spare rooms and barns, while neighbors raised walls and hammered roofs back on. The surveyor's widow received the money she was owed from fines the court levied, and the schoolteacher made room for her boy on the front bench. The land office replaced 2 clerks and brought in a new one who kept his books open for anyone to see. The churchyard grass grew back where someone had tried to scorch a warning. On Sundays, when Reverend Marcus felt strong enough, he preached shorter sermons with more quiet in them. People listened closer. My shoulder healed stiff but serviceable. Thunder stayed jumpy whenever a train rolled by. I couldn't blame him. Some nights I woke to the sound of a whistle in my head and had to walk out under the stars until the desert quiet settled me again. Sarah's scars faded to faint lines, but when a distant engine cried out at sunset, I saw her eyes go far away for a moment. Then she'd breathe and come back. We didn't talk about the trial much. We planted a small garden behind the parsonage and argued over how deep to set the tomato stakes. We fixed a squeaky step in the church and laughed when it still squeaked after we were done. Ordinary things have a way of stitching torn places. From time to time, a letter arrived from the capital. New arrests. Old cases reopened. A survey team sent to remark claims that never should have been filed. Not every wrong was set right, but enough were that people started to believe fairness had a fighting chance. A railroad man who testified sent us a bill of lading with a note scrawled on it, for the record books. Thought you might like to have it. We framed it and hung it in the parsonage hallway. It looked out of place and perfect at the same time. The grave marker over the Garrett's plot weathered fast. No one tended it. No one left flowers. Some children heard pieces of the story and dared each other to run past the spot after dark. Wade let it be. He said the earth knows what to do with men like that. As for the key Marcus flung into the brush, a ranch hand found it months later while fixing a fence. He brought it to the sheriff's office in a small cloth sack, like it was a rattler's rattle. Wade set it on his desk and never found a use for it. Funny thing, he told me once, turning it over in his palm. Whole world turned on this for a second, and then it didn't matter at all. He slipped it back in the sack and dropped it in a drawer. Life did not turn into a song just because we won in court. The wind still blew dust across the flats. Cabs still got lost in the brush. Bills still came due. But under all that, something steady took root. People looked each other in the eye more. The town council meetings ran shorter because folks said what they meant and then sat down. When a stranger tried to throw his weight around, someone would gently set him straight. "We do things differently here," they'd say. And that was true. Sometimes late in the day, Sarah and I ride out toward the spot where the rails curve through the desert. The ties are sun-cracked, the steel shines dull, and the sky does that same orange trick it did the night everything shifted. We don't linger long. We tip our hats toward the line and turn for home. It isn't a holy place exactly, but it's where I learned that the easy road, a step back, a turned head, can cost more than a bullet. It's where I learned that what you save once, you may have to defend again, and that it helps to plant tomatoes and fix church steps while you wait for the next hard thing. Sarah once asked me if I regret drawing on Billy first. I told her the truth straight. If I'd waited, we'd both be bones. She nodded, not because she likes that fact, but because she lives with facts now, the way a person who has touched iron and rope and fear must. When the whistle sounds at sundown and the rails hum faintly under the wind, we listen for a second, not in dread but in respect. Then we go inside, close the door, and light the lamp. Tomorrow will bring its own chores and its own trouble. We'll be ready enough. And if 50 years from now someone asks whether it was worth it, I hope the land itself answers before I do. Field straight, fences true, and a churchyard where the grass grows back, no matter who tried to burn it.